Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem, today we will be learning Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today, so let's see. We have a little bit of Mishnah Berurah left, and that would be Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Nun Vav. We did the beginning of it. We're up to the bottom line of the Mishnah Berurah on Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph by the words Kasfu Ha'achroinim. So that's going back on Siman Shin Zayin Sif Yud Daled. And once we complete that Mishnah Berurah, we'll continue with Shin Zayin Sif Tes Vav. Our learning today should be as chus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanusunim Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imnim Ben Bayom Ben Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleim Yitzim Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'ira Mishiba L'Geula Hashta Ba'Gala V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be as chus Refuah Shalema from Shemeir Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Sion Ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Leah Chava Adasa Bas Serel. They should have a refuah shalema b'sar shachil Yisrael, and our learning should be aschus for Yonasan ben Michal, Yoel ben Michal, together with all of our other brothers and sisters that find themselves in harm's way. B'chol makom shehem, the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over them in the schus of the Limud HaTorah and all of the tefillas of Klal Yisrael. So let's just do a little bit of, I guess I would call it housekeeping over here. Let's finish this final Mishnah Berurah. This Mishnah Berurah is Kat Nun Vav, the final Mishnah Berurah on Siman Shin Zayin Sif Yud Daled. So in Sif Yud Daled, the Mechaber had spoken about receiving a letter. You get a letter in the mail on Shabbos, and the Mechaber had said that if you get a letter and you don't know what's in it, then the Mishnah Berurah said you're allowed to read it on Shabbos. Because the Mechaber said you're allowed to read it on Shabbos, because if you don't know what's in it, it might be something that's negeya to safety, tzarchei haguf, and therefore you would be allowed to read it. If you know what's in it, then it's also to read it because of a gzera mishum shtarei hedyotais, which we're going to discuss in much greater detail as we move on today. Then the Mechaber made mention of the fact that if this letter comes from outside of the tchum, the Mechaber said, Tov li zar shelo yigaba, it would be proper not to touch it because of a question of muktzah. Something that was located outside of the tchum Shabbos at the onset of Shabbos is l'chayra muktzah. It's set aside from Shabbos use. You had no expectation of having this item on Shabbos. Therefore, it would be muktzah, and therefore the Mechaber said, Tov shelo yigaba. Now, in the beginning of Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Nun Vav, the Mishnah Berurah told us that the Achrayim reach a conclusion that these items are not considered muktzah. The letter is not considered muktzah, even for the person that it was sent to, because other people might be able to use it, etc., etc. So he said that the default position would be that the letter is not muktzah. Now, the truth is that when receiving letters nowadays, most poskim say that this heter, to read a letter if you don't know what's in it, because it might be information of great import to b'negeh to tzarchei haguf, doesn't really apply nowadays. Nowadays, any kind of message of that type would not be sent with snail mail. That's not the way you would get such information, and therefore the default position would seem to be that letters have absolutely no Shabbos use. There are questions brought up in the Paiskim as far as you might be able to take an envelope and use it as a bookmark, so maybe it does have some use, but usually letters, you're not going to use them for any other use until you know what's in them. Something like a bill, bank statements, these are all straight out shtarei hedyotis. This would all be muktzah. So really there doesn't seem to be any place to be handling mail on Shabbos whatsoever. Now the Mishnah Berurah is going to make sort of a tangential point over here when it comes to the question of receiving mail. Kasva Achrayim, the Achrayim write, Nagu, the custom is, Shaloi lekabel ha'igeres miyad ha'ena Yehudi hamevi b'Shabbos. So you're standing outside in front of your house on Shabbos afternoon, and let's assume that you're in a location where there is an Erev, so you don't really have a problem of hoitzah, of carrying the mail outside, and the mailman comes. and the mailman sees you standing on your porch. So instead of going over to the mailbox to put the mail into the mailbox, he figures he'll hand you the mail. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that could be problematic. This is what the Achrayim are saying over here. Nagu shaloy lekabel ha'igeres miyad eni Yehudi hamevi b'Shabbos. The meaning is that you should not accept the mail into your hand from the mailman. And this, of course, goes back to the whole question, is it muktzah or not? So even on the tzad that the mail is not inherently muktzah, right? So again, let's go back to what we said in the beginning of the shir. According to the Mechaber, who said that there's a heter to read mail if you don't know what's in it, because it might be negeh to tzarchei haguf, so then the mail itself is not muktzah. Still in all, you should not accept the mail from the hand of the postman. Why? Ela oimrim, rather, Ela oimrim loy, what you should say to the mailman, she'aniach al gabe karka o al gabe shulchan. Instead of receiving the mail from the hand of the postman, you should ask the postman to put it down somewhere. He should put it down on the ground. He should put it on the table. He should put it in the mailbox. But he should put it down. You should not accept it from him. Why? Very interesting. Because we must be concerned, Shema terem sheyamod lafush, that maybe the mailman, before he stands still outside, and lafush means to rest, before he stands at rest outside, Yital ha-Yisrael ha-Igeres miyadai, the Yisrael might accept the mail from the hand of the Eina Yehudi, v'nimtza sheha-Yisrael yasa gemar ha-Hitzah merishus l'rishus, and I'm going to explain this, and it will come out that the Yid who accepts the mail from the hand of the mailman is going to complete the action of Hitzah. Shehar Eina Yehudi asa akira, because the Eina Yehudi postman made the original akira on this act of Hitzah, v'Yisrael hanacha, and the Yid is making the hanacha. Okay, let's explain this. We know that when it comes to the malacha of Hitzah, when it comes to the malacha that we all know as carrying, every malacha of carrying on Shabbos consists of two different parts. There's an akira and there's a hanacha. So what is the Isser Daraisa of Hitzah on Shabbos? You're not allowed to transfer something from one type of rishus, from one type of domain, to another type of rishus. So you're not allowed to transfer something from rishus hayachid, let's say in your house, or in your enclosed yard, a private domain. You're not allowed to transfer an object from a rishus hayachid to a rishus harabim, to a public domain, or vice versa. You're not allowed to transfer an object from rishus harabim to rishus hayachid. You're also not allowed to transport something a distance of Daled Amos in rishus harabim. So if you're out rishus harabim, now there's no question of transferring from one domain to another. You're located in the rishus harabim. You're not allowed to transport an object a distance of 4 amos in rishus harabim. Now, every one of these isurim can be broken up into two parts. There's an akira, uprooting something, and a hanacha, putting something down. So let's go back to the first isur of Hitzah. You're not allowed to transfer something, let's say, from rishus hayachid to rishus harabim. What that means is, you're not allowed to pick up something in rishus hayachid, so you've uprooted it, and now you walk out to rishus harabim, and now you put it down in rishus harabim. You have now completed an act of transferring. You have completed an act of transferring something from one domain to the other. You uprooted it in rishus hayachid, that's the akira, and then you made a hanacha, you put it down in rishus harabim. So you uprooted it from rishus hayachid, you put it down in rishus harabim. Akira, hanacha. Same thing when you transport an object Daled Amos in rishus harabim. The isser of transporting something Daled Amos in rishus harabim is you're in rishus harabim, you make an akira, you pick something up in the rishus harabim, then you transport it a minimum of Daled Amos, and you make a hanacha, you put it down. Now you have accomplished a complete act of Hoitzah, a complete act of carrying. You made an Akira, you went Daled Amos, and you made a Hanacha. So again, the action, the Malacha, has two parts. The Akira, picking it up, and the Hanacha, putting it down. What we're afraid of, in this case of the letter, is the Eina Yehudi, right? He was working in the post office. He was sorting the mail in the post office. He prepared all the mail. Then he picked it up in Rishus HaYachid in the post office. So he made an Akira. Now he transferred it out to Rishus HaRabim, and he's walking in Rishus HaRabim. When he comes to you and he hands you the letter and you accept the letter, you might be finishing the act of Hoitzah. You're now accepting the letter. By you accepting the letter, you're going to do the Hanacha. You're the one who's considered to be putting it down. Unless the postman stops first in Rishus HaRabim. If he's Oimid Lofush, if he stops to take a break, he stops to take a rest, his stopping, when he stands still, that's considered a Hanacha. Okay, so now he did the Akira, he did the Hanacha. Now you have no problem. But if he's walking and he hands you the letter and you're standing still, now it's considered that you did the Hanacha. Even though you didn't do the Akira, you only did the Hanacha, but here we're going to have an Issa D'Rabbanan. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying. The Mishnah Berurah is saying is, the minig is, don't accept the letter from the postman because of the risk that you might be completing the Malacha of Hoitzah. Because he didn't stop. He's walking and he hands you the letter. So says the Mishnah Berurah here. Okay, let's go weiter. Now the Mishnah Berurah tackles a new problem. And that is, again, we're talking about a possible heter of reading mail on Shabbos because you don't know what's in that letter. It might be something that's negeh to tzarchei aguf on Shabbos, and therefore there's a possible heter of reading the letter. But what are you going to do? How are you going to open the letter? So opening the letter can entail a whole myriad of different malachas, depending on how the letter is sealed. Contemporary mail that's sealed in a glued envelope, how do you open it? You tear it open. Tearing it open can be an Issa D'Rabbanan. Some poskim hold it could even be an Issa D'Oraisa, but it definitely could be an Issa D'Rabbanan. It would be the malacha of kareya. Now, it could be kareya in a destructive fashion. It's a kareya that's kilkul, but that could be an Issa D'Rabbanan anyway. We're going to get into that more, Mirz Hashem, in Siman Shin Mem. We're going to assume right now that opening the letter would be an Issa D'Rabbanan. So how are you going to get the letter open? Says the Mishnah Berurah, if the letter is sealed, Omer le'ena Yehudi, you should say to the Eina Yehudi, postman, thank you so much for giving me the mail. Eini yachal lekroisai kol zman she'ena pasuach. But I have a problem. I can't read it unless it's opened. Umemela yavin Eina Yehudi v'yiftacheu. Now the Eina Yehudi postman will realize that you have a Shabbos problem, that you can't open the mail, so he'll do you a favor, it'll open it for you. But you should not say straight out to the postman, can you please open this for me? Unless there's a great pressing need. Again, like I said, we will discuss this question, opening the mail, in greater detail in Siman Shin Mem. Now, just again, high level, let's put all the ducks in a row here. The Mechaber is suggesting that there may be a heter to read mail on Shabbos. Why? Because of a tzorich. Because it might be something that's negeh to tzarchei aguf, and therefore we're going to relax the isser of shtarei hadyotos, and we're going to allow you to open the mail. So our whole basis over here is that your reading of the mail hinges on its tzorich. Okay. Opening the mail is an Issa D'Rabbanan. If opening the mail is an Issa D'Rabbanan, the Mishnah Berurah is suggesting, how should you get the mail open? You should do it b'remiza shaloi b'derech tzava. You should hint to the mailman. You should not instruct him to open the mail. You should hint to him that you need the mail opened. So this is Amir La'akum, but it's not straight out Amir La'akum. It's Amir La'akim Derech Remiza. You're not instructing the Ein Yehudi to do an Issa D'Rabbanan. You're making a Remiza. You're hinting to him that you need him to do this Issa D'Rabbanan. And it's B'makom Tzorech. There's a pressing need in order to do it. So that's why the Remiza over here would be mutter. Now, the Mishnah Berurah also said, if it's Tzorech Gadol, then you could mamish instruct straight out. Why? Because that's Amira La'akum on a D'Rabbanan, so it's a Shvus Dishvus B'makom Tzorech Harbe. That we learned earlier in the Mechaber, that a Shvus Dishvus B'makom Tzorech Harbe is mutter. That's why the Mishnah Berurah is suggesting that if it would be a Tzorech Gadol, you would be allowed to straight out instruct the Ein Yehudi to open the mail. Okay, now we're going to go weiter. Let's turn back to Kuf Gimel Lamed Aleph, and we're going to see Sif Tesvav. Now, for the coming Se'ifim in Shulchan Aruch, we have to reiterate just for a moment this Isser D'Rabbanan of Shtarei Hedyotos. So, in Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber introduced to us the question of Shtarei Hedyotos, which we translated literally as common documents. And the Mechaber said, what are exactly Shtarei Hedyotos in the context of Hilchos Shabbos? The Mechaber said, Shtarei Chayvos v'Cheshbonos. Documents that document loans, financial matters, Cheshbonos, financial calculations. So you want to know, let's say, contemporary examples of Shtarei Hedyotos. So I have over here on my desk, let's see. This is an insurance bill, Shtarei Hedyotos. This is a national grid, so this is a gas bill, Shtarei Hedyotos. This is an annual report from Coca-Cola, because I own exactly about 1.5 shares of Coca-Cola, so I get this fancy booklet a couple of times a year. So what's in here? This is going to be all the financial information about the company, spreadsheets and calculations and everything else. Shtarei Hedyotos. This is bona fide Shtarei Hedyotos. What else came in the mail? Again, a health insurance statement, Shtarei Hedyotos. A bill from a doctor's office, Shtarei Hedyotos. So these are all bona fide Shtarei Hedyotos that are absolutely usher to read on Shabbos. Why are they usher? So the Mishnah Berurah told us earlier in Sif Yud Gimel that there's a machlokes rishonim why precisely the reading of Shtarei Hedyotos are usher on Shabbos. One school of thought is that reading Shtarei Hedyotos is a violation of Mimtzai Cheftzecha V'Daber Davar. It's pursuing your own weekday type of pursuits. If you're verbalizing things, it's Daber Davar. So this is Asar on Shabbos. Daber Davar. Another school of thought is that there's another problem with reading Shtarei Hedyotos, and that is Gzeira Shemi Yimachek. Depending on the documentation that you're reading, you might come to erase something. Now, when you take out a bill from a doctor's office, there doesn't seem to be any room for Gzeira Shemi Yimachek. Right? You don't open a bill and don't like the information that's on it and erase the bill. So I don't see so much Gzeira Shemi Yimachek, but definitely Mimtzai Cheftzecha V'Daber Davar definitely would seem to apply. So that's Shtarei Hedyotos. Now, what we're going to see though is, and we already saw this, we already touched on it in Sif Yud Daled, while the Iker, the main Issa D'Rabbanan of Shtarei Hedyotos applies to items such as the ones that I'm showing you, what I referred to as bona fide Shtarei Hedyotos, it's also usher to read all sorts of other things on Shabbos. Gzeira mishum Shtarei Hedyotos. We don't want you to read other types of reading material. As a Gzeira, if you're going to read those, you might come to read Shtarei Hedyotos. And that's why in Sif Yud Daled, the Mechaber told me, you're not allowed to read mail. You're not allowed to read a what did he call it here? Igeres Shalom. You're not allowed to read Igeres HaShluchalai. In Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber said, V'Igare Shal She'ela Shalom. You're not allowed to read a letter. Reading a letter, that's not bona fide Shtarei Hedyotos. But the fear is, if we're going to allow you to read all sorts of documents and all sorts of things on Shabbos, you might come to read Shtarei Hadyotos. Now, I'm going to give kind of, in the interests of full disclosure over here, before we go weiter. It's going to become very obvious from the Mechaber, from the Mishnah Berurah, from what the Mishnah Berurah brings down from Rishonim, Achronim, and Poskim, that when you look at the question of reading things on Shabbos, the default position is you're not allowed to read things on Shabbos, basically, other than Torah and Tefillah. There's going to be one sheet in the Rishonim, and we're going to see that we probably paskin. Mr. Berurah is going to tell us that we follow probably that shita, that there are other items that you're allowed to read. You're allowed to read divrei chachma. You could read a science text, a medical text, unless you're a medical student and you're doing it to study. That's a whole different issue, whether you're allowed to read divrei chachma for studying purposes. But the default position, if you want to pick up something to read something on Shabbos, the default position is you're not allowed to read on Shabbos. Why? Gzeir mishum shtarei hadyotos. You're not allowed to read shtarei hadyotos, and therefore you're not allowed to read almost anything. If you want to read something on Shabbos, you need to have a heter. It has to fall into one of the categories that we're going to see of things that are mutter to read on Shabbos. So, for example, anything that you could learn Yira Shamayim from, you're allowed to read on Shabbos. So we're going to see that to read, let's say, an art scroll biography on a gadol should be mutter, because you could learn Yira Shamayim from that. We're going to see that to read Yiddish history, you want to read about the Golusin that Klal Yisrael went through, the tsaris that happened to Klal Yisrael. You want to see good things. You want to read history of Klal Yisrael. That could be mutter. Why? Because you could learn Toradic things from that. Now, why is that mutter? Well, let's analyze. Again, let's do the math. If the whole isser of reading is gzeira mishum shtarei hadyotos, well, why are shtarei hadyotos aser? Shtarei hadyotos mimtzai cheftzecha v'daber davar. Oh, mimtzai cheftzecha v'daber davar, cheftzecha asurin v'loy cheftzei shamayim. If there's an angle of mitzvah to it, then there's no isser of mimtzai cheftzecha v'daber davar. So if you could learn your shamayim, if you could learn shmiras Torah mitzvahs, if you could learn something beneficial in Yiddishkeit from what you're reading, so then you can't answer it under the rubric of Mitzvah Cheftzcha V'daber Davar. Shemi Yimachek? I don't think you're taking out your $28 art scroll book and you're erasing. So there doesn't seem to be room for Gzeira Shemi Yimachek. So here are examples of things that you could read because they fall under a category where we have a specific heter to read. Again, we're going to see that secular chachma, you want to read an interesting article about nuclear energy, you want to read something about health, you want to read something about an interesting article about chinuch habonim, the latest parenting advice from a parenting expert. So these, again, could fall under a specific category where there's a heter. But stam to read things, by default, reading would seem to be usher. Now let me give you a couple of examples here. To read advertisements on Shabbos, I have not found a single heter anywhere to read an advertisement on Shabbos. So you have these Jewish magazines that have all the advertisements for the shetelmachers and the real estate in Eretz Yisrael and the latest restaurants and food establishments and entertainment venues and everything else. Or it's coming into Yom Tov now, so there's going to be the pullouts. All the kids want their afikomen, so you're going to have the pullouts for the toy stores and everything else. There's no heter to read them on Shabbos. And it goes for Yom Tov too. There's no heter to read them. Those are, again, bona fide shtarei hadyotos. Because what are they? They're advertising products for sale with pricing information and everything else. That is shtarei hadyotos. There's no heter to read them. There are poskim that say that you're not allowed to read anything in the magazine if it has the advertisements in them. So again, I want to put this in perspective. You get the magazine, the Yiddish magazine, the Yom Tov issue, the special expanded Yom Tov issue, where the first 35 pages are advertisements, right? And there's an article in there about parenting skills. There's an article in there about Jewish history. These are things that you're allowed to read on Shabbos. There's Divrei Torah, something that you're allowed to read on Shabbos, right? But because the magazine is jam-packed full of advertisements, which are bona fide shtarei hadyotos, there are poskim that say you're not allowed to read anything in the entire magazine, which may technically render the magazine muktzah. Now, my disclosure over here is I am not giving you this psak. I am not paskening this. I'm not telling you over here that this is usher. You need to ask your Rav. Whoever it is that you ask your shilas to, go ask this shilah to a Rav. But what I want to bring to your attention over here is, this is something that the Welt is very, very makel on. And it's very questionable what the source of this kula is. If you want to pick up something on Shabbos to read it, you really need to know what the heter to read it is. And as we go through the rest of today's shir, you're going to see really, in the words of the Mechaber, the Mishnah Berurah, the Poskim, really just how far this goes. So, with that, against that backdrop, let's go to Sif Tes Vav, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Kaisel, a wall, a viloin, or a curtain, sheyesh by tzurais chayos mishunos, that has pictures of animals, aka artwork. You have a piece of art hanging on the wall that has pictures of animals. Or you have a curtain that's embroidered with pictures of animals. Or it has illustrations of people, shalmaisim, referring to historical events. David v'Goliath. You have a beautiful embroidered wall hanging that has a representation of David HaMelech with the slingshot and a big 12-foot tall Goliath with his shield and his helmet and his huge sword. So that's a picture. V'koisvim, and on the bottom of the picture, it has a caption. V'koisvim, and it says, Zu tzuras ploini. This is a picture of David HaMelech. V'zed yukon ploini. And this is the form of Goliath. Or you go back to the animals. There's a caption on the bottom. It says, on the right is an elephant. On the left is a tiger. In the middle is a monkey. So you have the picture and you have the caption. Says the Mechaber, Aser likrois boy b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to read the caption. There's Rabbaisai. What do you have here? You have a picture and you have a caption. Says the Mechaber, you're not allowed to read the caption. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Nun Zayin b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to read this caption on Shabbos. Gzeir Shem Yikra b'Shtarei Hadyotos. Because if we're going to allow you to read the caption under the picture, you might come to read Shtarei Hadyotos. So again, Rabbi say, you have the Yisod Rabbanon of reading Shtarei Hadyotos, and you have a very expansive Gzeira against reading almost anything else. Gzeira mishum Shtarei Hadyotos. And you want to see how far it goes, you can't read the caption under the picture because of a Gzeira mishum Shtarei Hadyotos. Okay, let's move on. Sif Tezayin. Malitzos. What's a malitza? A malitza is a sharp, concise saying or a proverb. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. That would be a malitza. Spare the rod, save the child. That's a malitza. So, malitzos mishalim, parables, shel sichas chulid, that are totally secular in nature. So this is reading sayings, stories, novels, malitzos, misholim, shalsichas chulin. They're totally secular in nature. V'divrei cheshek. Divrei cheshek. I thought long and hard and looked long and hard how to translate divrei cheshek over here, and it's pretty clear to me that what he means over here by divrei cheshek are reading something that's romantic or sensual in nature, provocative. Kigoin Sefer Emmanuel, like the Sefer Emmanuel. The Sefer Emmanuel was written by somebody who it seems at some level was a Talmid Chacham. He wrote Pirushim on Sifrei Tanakh, but he also wrote poems and stories, and it seems that they involve divrei cheshek as well. V'chein Sifrei Milchamos, or to read historical things about wars. Aser likrois bahem b'Shabbos. Not allowed to read them on Shabbos. Shtarei Yotos. Gzerim mishum shtarei Yotos. You're not allowed to read these kind of things on Shabbos. V'af b'choil aser. And during the week, it's also to read these types of materials as well. Why? Mishum Moshev Leitzim. Because of Moshev Leitzim. What's Moshev Leitzim? Sitting around with jokers. With a Moshev Leitzim lo yoshav, David HaMelech says in the first capital of Sefer Tehillim. What's the Isser of Moshev Leitzim? The Isser of Moshev Leitzim is wasting time. That's the Isser of Moshev Leitzim. Moshev Leitzim, to sit with Leitzim, are guys who are just sitting around and shooting the breeze and joking around, and the entire discussion that they're having is pointless, frivolous, and wasteful, right? You just sit around and you're not talking about anything that has any tzarech, that has any that's beneficial in any way, shape, or form. In other words, if you sit with a bunch of guys and you talk about the stock market, so at least there's a point, right? Should I invest in this? Should I invest in that? If you're sitting around and you're talking about the latest health food trends, okay, so there's a point to the conversation. What should I eat? What shouldn't I eat? You talk about the latest advances in technology because you're trying to make decisions, or it's new information that you're gathering that you could apply to your life. There's a point to the discussion. But when you sit around and you talk about things that are completely frivolous in nature, that have no point, that accomplish absolutely nothing, that's called Moshev Leitzim, and that's called wasting time, Rabbi Isai. I always quote from the Rishivas Zatzal, from Rav Moshe Zechariah Kodesh Levracha, who once said, he said that there's a saying in English, let's kill some time. I have some time to kill. The Rishivas Zatzal reacted in horror to that saying. He said, Zeit, Menschen. We're not killing time, we're killing people. What is a person? A person is only whatever he could accomplish with the time that God gave him. That's what makes up a person. What makes up a person is the Rebbe Shalom gave you X amount of time. You use your time. That's what makes you what you are. So if you kill time, you're killing a person. You're not killing time. The clock, you're not killing the clock. The clock is fine. The clock can outlive you. The clock is fine. You're not going to harm the clock. But you're killing yourself. You're killing other people. It says by Avram Avinu that Avram Avinu was Zaken Ba Bayamim, which literally means days. Ba Bayamim. He was advanced in days. Usually we say advanced in years. By Avram Avinu says he was advanced in days. Why? Because he used every day. He used every minute. He used every second. So there is no concept in Yiddishkeit of killing time. So that's why the Mechaber says over here, reading nonsense, reading things that have no point, af b'choil aser mishum Moshev Leitzim. Va'over, and he says there's another isser involved in reading these kind of materials, which is mishum al tifnu el ha'elilim. Pasuk says, al tifnu el ha'elilim, you should not turn yourself to elilim. We usually define elilim as avodah zarah. The Gemara in Shabbos makes an interesting drasha. Lo tifnu el midaitchem. Now, the Gemara over there, we just had in Sif Tes Vav, the Mechaber said, you're looking at a picture of different animals. So on Shabbos, you're not allowed to read the caption because Gzeira Mishum Shtari Hadyotos. But how about to look at the pictures themselves? The Gemara in Shabbos says, looking at the pictures is a problem. Why is looking at the pictures a problem? Al tifnu el midaitchem. Al tifnu el ha'elilim. The Gemara says, my Talmuda. What do you learn out from this pasuk? Al tifnu el elilim. Al tifnu el midaitchem. The Mishnah Berurah is going to bring down Rashi in Masechta Shabbos, where Rashi says, if you look at Mishnah Berurah's Katan Samach, El midaitchem, El asher atem oisim midas levavchem. You don't look at pictures that you made, things that you made up. It's a little difficult to perceive exactly what Rashi means. It sounds like the way Rashi is understanding the Gemara is, you walk outside and you see a beautiful tree, you see a beautiful mountain, so you want to talk about Neflayis HaBoirei, the wonders that the Rebbeinu Shalom created. All right, you're learning from the Rebbeinu Shalom's Bria, and you're praising the Rebbeinu Shalom for what he made. But Al Tiftu El Midaitchem. But pictures that you went and you made, it's not appropriate for you to be spending your time studying these things and talking about these things. The Aruch has a different pshat. The Aruch looks at it. He says, the Gemara means, Al tifnu el midaitchem. Al tifnu. Don't turn your mind and your thought and your concentration, el midaitchem, to things that are outside of things that have a point. Don't go to the Museum of Modern Art to go kill time and spend half a day looking at the wonders of abstract art and at banana peels that are duct taped to the wall and Picasso's. That's al tifnu midaitchem. You're here for a purpose. Your mind should be on divrei tzorich. Your mind should be concentrating on things that have value. Again, it goes back to Moshe Leitzim. So al tifnu midaitchem. Don't turn your minds to stupidity. That's how the Aruch understands the Gemara in Shabbos. Continues to Bechaber, uve divrei cheshek. When it comes to romanticism and provocative things and sensual things, uve divrei cheshek, ikasu mishum megara yetzer hara. Over here, there's another problem, and that is arousing the Yetzer Hara to Divrei Avera and to Hirhurim Roim. That's we say an Al Chet on Yom Kippur. Al Chet shechatanu l'fanecha b'Yetzer Hara. We clap Al Chet, we say Vidui on Averis that we did with the Yetzer Hara. What does that mean? It means that forget the Yetzer Hara came to us and tried to tempt us to do an Avera. We incited the Yetzer Hara. We read something or looked at something that incited our Yetzer Hara to bring us to Avera. So says the Mechaber, if you're talking about Divrei Cheshek, so forget Shabbos, forget Moshe Leitzim, forget al tifnu el elilim. You're being megara Yetzer Hara. You're arousing the Yetzer Hara. That's mamish aser. And says the Mechaber, umisha chibron, people who write such things, umisha he'etikon, people who make copies of such things, ve'in tzarek loymar hamatfisan, and for certain, those who go print such books and magazines and everything else, machatiyim es harabim, they're being machti es harabim. And if you take a look in the Bir Halacha, b'divrei Maskal machtiim es harabim, amru chazal, kol hamachti es harabim, ein maspikin biyadai lasis tshuva. The Rebbeinu Shalom and Shemaim, they won't give him the ability to do tshuva. V'ha'ayne she'amar b'gamar alam misleitzes, shem is aynoisav mismatin, he'll lose his parnasa, v'yisurin ba'an alav, he'll suffer suffering yisurin, v'noifel b'gehenim, he'll come to Gehenim. So this is terrible stuff over here. So again, let's just recap what the Mechaber says over here. The Mechaber says to read secular things on Shabbos, Malitzais, Mishalim, Shal Sichas Chulin. These are aser, a gzeira mishum shtari hadyotais. Now let it read these things. Again, the default position is that 99% of reading is aser, gzeira mishum shtari hadyotais. Again, you have a rav that you ask your shilas to when you have a shilah on your blech, when you have a shilah about your cholent, when you have a hilchas nida shilah, when you have all your shilah, you have a rav that you ask your shilas to, go ask your rav. Ask your rav. Am I allowed to read this on Shabbos? Am I allowed to read that on Shabbos? Am I allowed to read the serial in the Yiddish magazine on Shabbos? Am I allowed to? Ask your shayla. Ask your shaylas. Find out from your Rav. Get a psak. What you're allowed to read on Shabbos, what not. I'm showing you over here in the Dishu Mishnah Berurah here that this is a topic that is not pashut at all. The Welt seems to be very, very makel. I'm not coming here to be karatager, chas v'chalila, on Klal Yisrael. But you have to know. There's halacha mefareshes over here in Shulchan Aruch. You have to know what the halacha is. Got to go ask a Rav and go ask a shayla. And then the Mechaber just brings down, he tells you that reading these kind of materials bichlal involves shilas, even during the week. Shilas of Moshev Leitzim, shilas of Al Tiftu Alilim, shilas of being Megara the Yetz Sahara. How careful you have to be with what you read and what you look at. Going to the supermarket and going through the checkout counter, but it brings up these shilas, the stuff that they have over there. But as you get, what do they put by the checkout counter? They put candy bars, and then they put what they would call eye candy. So they put stomach candy and eye candy. That's what they put over there but that eye candy is chazerfleisch for us. So this brings up all of these shilas. It's not dvarm pshutim at all, Rabbi say. Okay, let's take a look here at some Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah is cutting on ches. Chulin, the Mechaber said he's speaking over here about Malitzais u'mishalim shal sichas chulin. So very important Mishnah Berurah, which is going to introduce to us right away some of the categories of things that you are allowed to read. Ve'ein bechlal zeh, we don't include in this isser of what you're not allowed to read, Yosifun, the writings of Josephus. So what is Josephus? He was a historian. There's questions, was he Jewish, was he not? But this was a historian who lived during the period of Bayis Sheni, maybe Churban Bayis Sheni, and he wrote the history of what happened to Klal Yisrael during that time. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not included in what you're not allowed to read. You're allowed to read that. The Sefer Yuchsin, what's the Sefer Yuchsin? The Sefer Yuchsin takes a lot of the primary, most important personalities of Klal Yisrael, beginning with Moshe Rabbeinu and going forward. And it gives like brief biographical sketches of all of these people. Tanoim, Amoraim, Nevi'im. So you're allowed to read Sifrei Yuchsin. V'divrei Hayamim shel Rabbi Yosef Kayin v'Shevet Yehuda. These were writings, historical writings of the Golusin that happened to Klal Yisrael, the Milchamas that happened in Klal Yisrael in different parts of the world at different time periods. Shevet Yehuda documents a lot of what went on during the Spanish Inquisition. So these are histories. Shemehel Yilmadu Divrei Musar v'Yira. From this you could learn Yira Shemayim, Divrei Musar. You see how Klal Yisrael handled the persecutions. You see the biographical sketches of the Gedolei Olam of Klal Yisrael. So from this you could learn Yira Shemayim. This has value. So again, this isn't going to be also Gzeri B'Shtari Ed Yoitos, because this could fall under Cheftzei Shamayim. So again, you want to take out from the bookshelf Art Scrolls biography on Rav Moshe, Art Scrolls biography on Rav Pam. I'm looking here, Rav Yaakov, Rav Pam, even different types. Mike Tress. You want to read a beautiful biography of somebody who was Isaac B'Tzarchi Tzibur and was Moshe Nefesh B'Tzarchi Tzibur. There's your Shamayim that you could learn from these books that you could read. You want to read some of the history books of things that went on during the Milchama, during the Holocaust. I'm not talking about the terrible stories. Those bring up maybe different shilas about reading things that are going to bring you to tears, let's say on Shabbos, which could be a whole different problem. But there are things that are incredibly inspirational. There are stories that Mama show you the Yad Hashem, one of the books that to me were a very, very moving book because of my family's personal history. There's a book out there, Daughter of Two Mothers. You read that book, you see the Yad Hashem, it's incredible. And you're a Shamayim. So these are things that Pashtus you could read on Shabbos. Valkena Filuk Suvam Balaz Shari. The Mishnah Berurah says you could read these even in English. He's referring to a Ramah that we didn't learn yet. That's going to be matir reading a lot of things in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, you don't have to come on to that heter. You could read these things even in English. Because again, there's no room to answer them. You're not going to answer them because of Moshe Leitzim. You're not going to answer them Mishum Al Tiftu Elo Elilim. You're not going to answer them Gzeri Mishum Shtari Ed Yoitais. Because again, it's Cheftzei Shamayim. Ois Katan Nuntes. Another bomb of a Mishnah Berurah that people really have to take to heart. The Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber says it's also to read these kind of things, not only on Shabbos, it's also to read them during the week. Mishum Moshe Leitzim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisai, V'cholshkein, certainly. Ha'hoylech letartiyois v'karkasiyois. People that go to theaters and to circuses. V'heim minei schoik. This is entertainment venues. K'di'isa ba'avodah zarah daf yudches amid beis, which is the topic of a beferish Gemara in avodah zarah yudches amid beis. U'sha'ar minei tachpulois. Tachpulois, I was searching for the English word, how I would translate tachpulois. Tachpulois, to me, sounds like stunts. AKA, really? Sports. To go to Yankee Stadium. To go to an NBA game. To me, that's minei schoik and tachpulois. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's also Mishum Moshe Leitzim. The Gamba Purim ein mutter, even on Purim, apparently there was a minute that some people would go to these kind of places on Purim because they figured Purim is a day for clowning around. So it's a day for clowning around. So that's the day that you can go to the circus. Says Chavetz Chaim, ein mutter rak haschoik she'osim zecher lach hashverish. That's only the type of Purim spiels that we make. It doesn't mean that on Purim you go to a musical on Broadway. Rabim says Chavetz Chaim Kayoim nowadays Nasa Davazek Hefker Eitzel Ezel Anoshim Leilech Lebeis Tartiyos. He says that Ba'avonisenu Rabim nowadays it became Hefker, and people do go to such places. Va'akosav Tzayveach Va'omer, and the Navi screams and says Al Tismach Yisrael El Gil. Klal Yisrael should not be rejoicing El Gil, to the type of rejoicing and halulus that the Umayis Ha'olam do. V'gam ikabazeh b'shum b'gari yetzahara b'nafsham. And also there's this other angle of being megara the yetzahara. I couldn't find it now, but I believe I remember reading in one of the tshuvas from Rav Moshe that Rav Moshe writes that inevitably, by all of these kind of things, you also have the problem of divrei cheshek. You also have the problem that involved in all of these things, there are always going to be aspects of divrei cheshek, of things that they're going to be throwing in your face to tempt you to avera. And you know what I mean. Provocative things, divrei cheshek, sensual things, provocative things. And if you think for a moment, you know that it's true, right? Go to a football game. What's part and parcel of a football game? Cheerleaders, right? We don't have to talk here openly about the cheerleaders and the point of the cheerleaders, right? You go to a baseball game. I don't think baseball games, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think baseball games are famous for cheerleaders. I'm not sure why it is that football got cheerleaders and basketball games got cheerleaders and baseball games didn't get cheerleaders. I don't know. But I don't think that cheerleaders is part and parcel of Major League Baseball. Fine. So there are no cheerleaders. But what do they put on the Jumbotron? What are the pictures that they put up on the big screens, right? And what are they going to use to draw you into different things? And what are the advertisements that they're going to push into your face? So that's why he says over here that in all of these things you also have the problem of Megari Yetzahara B'nafsham. Now again, I'm reading the Mishnah Berurah. I'm not pushing. I don't have an agenda that I'm pushing over here. And I'm telling you, you want to go to Yankee Stadium and you want to go to a baseball game, go ask your Rav. I'm not here to be Karataga on Klal Yisrael again. And that's not my point here. I give a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. I'm reading to you from the words of the Chavetz Chaim. I'm not giving you the words of Yisrael Weiss. I'm giving you the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim is Shrine Chai V'Kayim over here. He's bringing psukim al Tismach El Gil. And again, part and parcel of the Isser over here is something that the world, unfortunately, is very kal, very lenient about nowadays, even in some circles that should know better. There's this saying nowadays, let's go chill. We got to chill a little. Chilling, Rabbi Isai, is not a Torah concept. The Torah concept is not chilling. We don't go chill. This Moshev Leitzim Lo Yoshev. Life is here for a purpose. You go spend 4 hours, 5 hours, and between the traveling to and from and the parking and everything else, for what? For a ball game, right? I don't know. I could stop. Just take the words over here of the Chavis Chaim. V'amru Chazal, and Chazal say kalam esloitzeitz neifel begehenim. People who spend time on litzanis, on frivolous, wasteful activities, neifel begehenim. Now again, I do want to caution, there is a time and place for relaxation. But relaxation could mean going with your wife and going to a park and walking around the lake. That's not what we're talking about here. That is not a frivolous, wasteful activity. It's not what we're talking about here. Shenemar v'yisurin ba'analav. Shenemar v'altal t'sleitzes ben yesreku moisrechem. Mr. Berurah's Cotton Samach, the Mechaber brought down the drasha in the Gemara al tifnu el ha'elilim lo tifnu al midaitchem. Mr. Berurah brings down the lashon of Rashi al midaitchem el asher atem oisem midas levavichem. Don't spend your time gazing and studying and looking at things that you made up on yourself. We brought down the other pshat in al tifnu al midaitchem. Don't divert your mind to frivolous pursuits that you just made up. The Museum of Modern Art, etc., etc. Okay. Eiskan Samach Aleph, the Mechaber spoke very harshly against people who prepare such publications. Vein Tzarech Lemer Hamatfisen. V'chein similarly, Meichrei Sfarim Haseicherim Be'inyanim Ke'elu. Peddlers and merchants, people who own bookstores and sell these types of books, Mamtzian Oisam Lakainim Likrais Behem, and sell them to people to read, Heim Bechlal Zeh, they are included in the harsh reality of what the Mechaber is speaking about over here, all the Isurim that they are being over. V'ayin b'sefer Machne Chai b'tshuva Aleph, sheherech b'inyan zeh ma'od. V'amr Chazal say, Gadol hamachti la'adam yosim in a hargoi. Somebody who brings a person to Avera is worse than somebody who kills a person. Shehargoi hu rak ba'olam hazeh. Somebody kills a person, he's only killing him in this world. V'amachtioi, but somebody who brings somebody to Avera, who gam ba'olam haba, is killing him for all eternity, is killing him in olam ha'emes as well. Okay, let's move on. We're going late, but we have to move. So let's continue. Says the Ramah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. The Ramah gives a very broad heter over here. Hagah says the Ramah, V'nira l'dakte, kod also likras b'sichas chulin v'sipurei melchamos. This that the Mechaber is saying, that on Shabbos you're not allowed to read things of a secular nature, but those are things that are not usher to read even during the week. In other words, not things that are Moshev Leitzim, not things that are Divrei Cheshek, things that technically you're allowed to read, but on Shabbos you can't read them because of Gzeri Mishum Shtarei Ad Yotais. Says the Ramah, Hainu Dafkim Ksuvim B'Lashon Laz. That's only if they're written in another language other than Lashon HaKodesh. Ava B'Lashon HaKodesh Shari, but if they're written in Lashon HaKodesh, it's mutter. V'chein nirali milachit shekasva Taisus Perik Kol Kisvei. The Ramah brings a right to this from a Taisus in Masechta Shabbos. V'chein nagu l'hakel bazeh, and we're noig to be makel in this way. So again, so the Ramah's bringing a heter over here, and he's saying things that are inherently not usher to read, they're only usher to read on Shabbos, you're allowed to read them if they're written in Lashon HaKodesh. The Mishnah Berurah is going to give us one explanation of this heter. I'll tell you a second one from the Aruch HaShulchan. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Samach Beis, Likrois B'sichas Chulin. But, says the Mishnah Berurah right away, Uvedirei Cheshek Shuhu Megari Yetzahara. Right? Provocative reading material that incites the Yetzahar l'kuli alma aser afilu b'lashon hakodesh. I don't care what language it's written in, it's aser. V'chol she'aser l'kroisai, anything that is aser to read, aser afilu l'taltala, you're also not allowed to handle it because it's muktzah. If it's a publication that you're not allowed to read, it has no Shabbos use, it becomes muktzah machmas gufa, you're not allowed to handle it. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Samach Gimel, Avo b'Lashon HaKodesh. So the Ramah gives this heter to read in Lashon HaKodesh. The Mishnah Berurah explains this heter in a very fascinating fashion. The halashon ba'atzmai yesh by kedusha. Lashon HaKodesh has inherent kedusha. V'loimed mimenu divrei Torah, and you use Lashon HaKodesh to learn Torah. Now, the heter, and again we're going to read further what the Mishnah Berurah says, the heter, according to the Mishnah Berurah, seems to be that whenever you're reading a publication written in Lashon HaKodesh, you're gaining a greater understanding of Lashon HaKodesh. Gaining a better understanding of Lashon HaKodesh and becoming more fluent in reading Lashon HaKodesh is beneficial to learning Torah, because it means that the next time you open up a Rashba, it's going to be easier for you to read a Rashba. The next time you want to learn a Ramban on Chumash, it's going to be easier for you to learn the Ramban. So therefore, reading something in Lashon HaKodesh becomes Cheftzei Shamayim. That's what he seems to be saying over here. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, if that's the explanation of the Ramah's heter, then we could expand this heter. In that case, a letter that's written in Lashon HaKodesh, you should also be allowed to read, even to reread a letter that you already know what it contains. Remember, earlier the Mechaber said you could read a letter if you don't know what the letter says. It's something you never read yet. Why? Because maybe it's Negeya to Tzarchei Aguf. But now the Mishnah Berurah is saying, according to this Ramah, that reading Lashon HaKodesh is mutter because it's Cheftzei Shamayim, so then you can read a letter that's written in Lashon HaKodesh. The Yesh Lilmod Mitochei HaLashon, because by reading it, you'll become more fluent in the reading of Lashon HaKodesh. V'gam kasabay kama psukim shel Torah. Often things that are written in Lashon HaKodesh have psukim in them. However, shtarei chayvos v'cheshbonos, but bona fide shtarei adyotos, gam l'Ramah aser afilu b'Lashon HaKodesh. So if you get a Hebrew version of the Wall Street Journal, you can't apply the Ramah's heter and say, oh, by reading the Wall Street Journal in Hebrew, I'm going to become more fluent in Hebrew. It'll help me read a Rashba. No, that only helps for things that are not real Shtari Adyoitos. They're only also to read Gzeira Mishum Shtari Adyoitos. So if they're written in Hebrew, it could become Cheftzei Shamayim, so maybe that you could read, but not actual Shtari Adyoitos. I don't care what language they're written in. We're not going to be mounted to read actual Shtari Adyoitos. The Aruch HaShulchan says a little different. The Aruch HaShulchan says, look, we have to remember, bona fide Shtari Adyoitos are Aser. And they're Aser no matter what language they're in. Other secular reading materials that are not inherently Aser to read are Aser on Shabbos, Gzeira Mishum Shtari Adyoitos. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, but we're not going to apply that to things written in Lashon HaKodesh. Why? Because the Gzeira Mishum Shtari Adyoitos is, if we allow you to read, secular reading material, you might come to read Shtari Adyoitos. But Shtari Adyoitos are not written in Lashon HaKodesh. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan was writing as a Rav in Europe. It would apply here in the United States too. Bona fide Shtari Adyoitos are not written in Hebrew. So if says the Aruch HaShulchan, to read something in Hebrew, we're not going to make a Gzeira Mishum Shtari Adyoitos, because you're not going to confuse it with reading the gas bill. You're not going to say, if I read this publication in Hebrew, I'm going to come to read my Wall Street Journal. You're not going to mix it up, because this is Lashon HaKodesh, and that's not. So the Shaila will be, how about in Eretz Yisrael? In Eretz Yisrael, this heter of the Aruch HaShulchan wouldn't apply. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah Vayter, v'get mutar l'taltaloi. You're allowed to handle a get. A get is not muktzah on Shabbos. Now this will surprise you. Afal pisha kasa b'lashon laz. Even if the get is written in English. Yes, the Mechaber paskins that a get does not necessarily have to be written in Hebrew. The Mechaber paskins that a get could be written in any language, as long as it says what it has to say. So if you have a get, even if a get is written in English, you're allowed to read a get on Shabbos. Why? Because you could use a get to learn Hilchas Gittin. So that again, it would be learning Torah, it would be Cheftzei Shamayim. Ulinyan kriyas Zeitungen b'Shabbos. How about reading the newspaper on Shabbos? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Af Shevet Shuvas Yaakov Mekel Bazeh. There is a Shuvas Shvus Yaakov that seems to be Mekel about reading newspapers, and the reason he's Mekel is the same kula as the Mechaber to read a letter that you never read before, which is that you read the newspaper because there might be vital information in the newspaper that you need for tzarchei haguf, So it might contain vital information that you need for Shabbos. Here again, the poskim say that this does not pertain to contemporary times, because the newspaper that you get delivered to your door is not going to have vital information that you need for right now. That's just not the way such information is delivered nowadays. So it doesn't seem to apply. And the Mishnah Berurah says, despite this Tshuva Shvus Yaakov, Harbe Achreidim Oisrin, many Achreidim disagree with this Tshuva Shvus Yaakov, and they answer it, because the newspaper has a business section. And a lot of the newspaper is bona fide Shtari Ad Yotais. And therefore, we're not going to be matir reading the newspaper. And again, here is where you see a hint that just because a magazine or a newspaper contains a science section that you might be allowed to read. We didn't see that Sif Cotton in Mechaber yet. We're going to see it soon. I know we're going way over time, but I'm still going weiter. But if the newspaper or magazine contains a business section that you're not allowed to read, you're not allowed to read the rest of the magazine either. Okay. Weiter, Eis Cotton Sabbath Dalit. So the Ramah put forward this heter that if it's written Lashon HaKodesh, you could read it. Eis Cotton Sabbath Dalit, Shari, Aval HaAguda, V'ataz, V'abach, V'oid Arbe Achreidim Cholkin Al Zeh V'oisren. They disagree with this Ramah. V'chedu Gam Kein Das HaGra. Well, if he's that, Gam Be'Iger Shalom, Einaf Gemini Ben Lashon Lazar Ben Lashon HaKodesh. So the Mishnah Berurah is kind of shooting down this Lashon HaKodesh heter of the Ramah. Okay, moving along to Sif Yud Zayin in the Mechaber, says the Mechaber, and I alluded to this earlier. Aser lilmoid b'Shabbos v'yomtiv zulas b'divrei Torah. You're not allowed to study or learn things on Shabbos other than divrei Torah. Va'afilu b'sifrei chachmos aser. You're not even allowed to read science articles, health articles. Not allowed to read these things on Shabbos. That's the first opinion in the Mechaber. But v'yesh bi shematir. But there are Rishonim that answer this. If you look in the Berurah, you have the Rambam, who takes a very, very strict approach. Basically, the Rambam, you can read Torah. That's it. You're not reading anything else on Shabbos. Kedushas Hayoim is part of it. The sanctity of Shabbos, you don't belong reading other things. And Gzerim Mishum Shtari Ad Yotais. Divrei Torah, that you could read. On the other hand, you have the Berurah brings down the Ramban and the Rashba. They're matter divrei chachma. The Ramban and the Rashba seem to say that we don't have to worry that if you read a science article on nuclear fission, that is going to be mischalif b'shtari ad yotais. You're going to come to read a spreadsheet, or you're going to come to read Investors Business Daily. You're not going to mix up those two things, the Ramban and the Rashba seem to say, and therefore divrei chachma they were matter to read on Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, an interesting thing. Valpis farasai, according to the Ramban and the Rashba, muter lahabit ba'astrolabe b'Shabbos. You would be allowed to use an astrolabe. An astrolabe is a fascinating instrument. An astrolabe is similar to a sextant. This was a tool that you could look through. There are actually two different types of astrolabes. One type of astrolabe was something that you look through and you look up at the sky and you look at celestial objects like the moon or a star or a planet on the sky, and you could use it to measure the distance and the angle between different celestial objects, between celestial objects and the horizon. There's another type of astrolabe that has star charts on it. So this is a tool. So it's not a book that has Divrei Chachma printed in it. It is a tool that is used in the pursuit of learning Divrei Chachma. So what the Mechaber is saying is, according to the Rishonim, that you're allowed to read an article on astronomy, you're also allowed to pick up the astrolabe and look up at the sky and take, and work with astronomy. It's a way of learning the Chachma. What just struck me, though, is the Shaila of Medida, the Shaila of measuring. I didn't think about it before. Could be that the Mechaber is only talking about the astrolabe that is the representation and the star charts, not the astrolabe that's similar to the sextant that's used for measuring, because that might bring up a Shaila of Medida, of measuring on Shabbos that we learned as Aser. Okay. And the Ramah closes out Sif Yud Zayin, and he says, Ulahafcha, ulataltala, if you're allowed to look at the astrolabe on Shabbos, then it's not muktzah. So then you're allowed to turn it over, look at both sides of it. You're allowed to move it around because it has a Shabbos use according to these Rishonim, and it's not also. Says the Mishnah Samachay. V'yesh bi shamater v'chein noagin lahakel. The minig is to be makel to allow you to read such texts, science texts, medical texts on Shabbos. V'kasabel yerabed yirei shamayim roy lahachmer bazeh. A yirei shamayim should be machmir. Ki Rambam v'Aran oisrim, because you have major Rishonim, the Rambam, the Ran, they also reading such texts. This is a keli that's used to look up at the stars. If you're telling me it's mutter, so what's the difference if you read about it from a book or you look at a tool and you study the sky with a telescope? There's no difference, or an astrolabe. If you're allowed to learn it, you're allowed to learn it. Okay, so I just want to, again, just close out this piece of Siman Shin Zayin. We do have this very serious topic of Shtari Hedyotais and reading other types of materials that could be other Gzera Mishum Shtari Hedyotais. The default position is that reading things on Shabbos that are of a secular nature right away entails a Shaila in Hilchos Shabbos. It could be an Issa D'Rabbanan, depending on what it is that you're reading. There are certain categories that are mutter. Anything that you could learn your Shemayim from, Divrei Musar from, is going to be mutter. We have these Rishonim that say that Divrei Chachma, to read a text about science, to read a text about health, could be also mutter, according to these Rishonim. The Mishnah Berurah is saying that we side with those Rishonim. Reading advertisements, certainly usher. And again, I'm urging you, if there are things that you want to read on Shabbos, ask a Shaila Rabbi Say. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. Exclusively Liman HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua Zefurus Parnasset Shtuchim to all those in need. We should be Zaycha to see the BS Gal Tzedek. B'meher v'yabeinu. Amen. Be well.